Welcome to the Jazz Flyte Podcast. I'm your host, Darrell Scott, and together we will dive into the lives and careers of the jazz legends who have left a rhythmic imprint on the world. Be prepared to reminisce on the highs and the lows of their musical journey and the trials that sculpted their timeless musical gems. We'll preserve the legacy of these extraordinary maestros and find inspiration in the melodies of their lives. Subscribe now and never miss a beat. Now, let's get to the show.
What if you and I lived happily ever after? I tell you now it's easy to do. What if you believed in me and I in you? Dreams would come true. Oh, what if you, what if I, what if we could believe?
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I am Darrell Scott. You are listening to the Jazz Flyte Podcast. Our guest is a singer, songwriter, author, music educator, voiceover actor, professor. I don't think I left anything out, but I think that takes up her entire day. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Maria Jacobs. Maria, how are you today?
I'm good, Darrell. How are you?
I'm doing the best I can, what little I got. This will be fun because actually, I'm so glad I have this filter in my head that takes my thoughts and decides whether or not I should say them or should not say
Where
them.
do I get that? Where do I get that?
I'll tell you the story after we're done. It's a
All right.
it's a funny story, but it
Yeah.
happened when I was about 11.
Okay.
Let's start with when did you start singing? How old were you and why did you begin singing?
Wow. I think I first started singing because I wanted them to come get me out of the crib after my nap. Honestly, I'm told I sang from my crib when I was like, 2 or 3 years old. I think singing was just one of those things that just came very natural to me at a very, very early age. And, I came out face up. Isn't that interesting? The doctor had to turn me around, and my mom and dad would joke, "You came out ready to sing."
Mhm.
I began singing in church when I was like 5 years old, though. I'm from the Middle Eastern Byzantine Catholic faith expression, and so one morning, mom was sick and didn't go to church, so I couldn't sit downstairs with her. So my dad and my sister took me up to the choir loft where my aunt and my cousins and a lot of extended church family always was. And I knew it was so special to be there. So I just never left. So yeah, singing kind of began with me as a very young child.
So I'm not sure at what age you can say that you have influences, but when
Mm.
did you start to follow people or pay attention to other voices, other singers? When did that start?
That's a really good question. I was in a musical family. My dad is a drummer. My cousins in the choir, they were all singers. And so I was tuned in at a very early age, right in my own family, to live music. We'd go out when I was little. We'd go out listen to my dad's band play, or I'd hear my cousins sing solos in the choir. And so I started listening to singers and getting influenced by musicians right in my own family from the time I was very young. And my dad was an avid listener of the big band era and
Mhm.
swing music. And so he brought home Ella Fitzgerald and Mel Torme and Frank Sinatra and Matt Monroe and Joe Williams. Those were the records. That's what I was listening to very early on. When I got to be a teenager, I started really appreciating, some more pop music, singer-songwriters, Carole King, Joni Mitchell, Stevie Wonder. I listened a lot to Teena Marie in the 70s and, bands, actual bands. I would listen to the classic rock bands today. I loved Ambrosia. I loved David Pack and, Boston and Kansas and Styx. I mean, I listened to all that stuff. Heart. I really was a big fan of Ann and Nancy Wilson of Heart. So I got real enthralled with singer-songwriters, basically.
Mhm.
And in my later adolescence, I started trying my hand at songwriting. And that's kind of where it really began for me. 1920, I was in college, 1920, 21 years old. I wrote my first couple of songs. So
Do do you still
started
have them?
early.
You still have the
Yes.
songs?
I have my first 4 songs that I ever wrote and recorded. I do. They are definitely in the style of the Great American Songbook. And one song was a little more poppy, smooth. Honestly, this one song I wrote called She Won't Mind, I often thought of maybe rewriting the bridge and releasing it in this later time in my life because it was a sweet little song. Yeah, I do still have them. They're on recording. They're not on
Uh,
CD though. They're like I had them turned into MP3s if I'm not mistaken, because that was back when they were recording on DAT tape. I thought we were so advanced. I thought we
uh,
were so advanced. It wasn't the reel to reel anymore. And I
right.
thought, well, this is so advanced. I've got it on a DAT tape. So cool, you know. And then I had them transferred from cassette. I got a little adapter where you put the cassette in and
Right.
you connect it to your computer. So I had them turned into MP3s, and they sound like very old recordings, but they were piano, bass, and drums. Definitely like, AABA style tunes, very influenced by the Great American Songbook. I worked hard to get out of that to be able to write hooky kinds of tunes, choruses. So that took a little time to transfer. My first songs were definitely, you can tell I'm influenced by the Great American Songbook.
Okay. You mentioned one of the people that influenced you growing up was Ella Fitzgerald. I
Yeah.
always go, I appreciate Ella singing. I appreciate more her ability to scat. That just
Yeah.
okay, excuse me,
Yeah.
folks. Don't get me
That's
wrong.
all right. That's
Did
all right.
did you do that? Did you develop your own? And if you did, how did you do that?
It's a great question. I didn't have the fundamentals early on that I give my students today at Kent State. I'm the vocal jazz professor at Kent State University, and I teach privately from my own home. And there are building blocks, fundamental harmonic building blocks that you can start with that I did not have. But what I did was, she was in my ear a lot. When I first, as a kid, heard her epic How High the Moon, where she just took chorus after chorus after chorus, never a repeated idea. She cut her teeth with the great beboppers, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, Chick Webb on drums, Lester Young on saxophone. I mean, she was able to sing what she was hearing. I heard later down the road that she played a little piano, and that's where really it started for me. I started taking piano lessons. I took them at like 8 or 9 years old. I was one of the kids that hated piano lessons, and my parents would like beat me down. No, you're going to take piano. Well, it didn't work. Eventually I quit, didn't want any part of it, but I found a jazz piano teacher when I was at Ohio State back in the early 90s. And he used to be the music director for the Jackie Gleason show. That's how far back he went.
Hmm.
His name was John Ulrich. He knew every tune and every key. We would sing, and he would teach me because I was a flute player. I knew my key signatures. So I knew, how do I describe this? I knew how to spell a triad already, and I knew how to make it a minor triad, lower the third by one half step. So he started teaching me seventh chords and jazz chords and how to turn them. So I would really labor painfully over these chords and learn how to turn them. And I would read these lead sheets with just the chords. And I labored a long time to be able to turn them because I knew if I wanted to scat sing and write songs, it was all going to happen at the piano. So I
Hmm.
really pushed myself to learn how to play chords. And all I did was when I could find a chord and turn it to the next chord, maybe a 2/5 progression, which these jazz American songbook songs are really made out of. When I learned how to turn them, I was free and I would just start to sing along. I would play these chords and I would sing. I don't know that you'd call them the fundamentals. I teach guide tones and chord tones now, and how to find the root and how to find the third and how to find the seventh. I teach that stuff to my students. I didn't really understand all of that stuff. I just put my hands on the chords and I sang. And then I went out to jam sessions and I took my lead sheets and I gave them to the band for the song that I wanted to do in my key. And then I would just start going out on a limb, without a net. And when you had like what I would call a real advanced piano player underneath me and bass and drums, I had that bottom, I had that rhythm section underneath me. And suddenly all the things that I heard would filter through and I would just start taking scat solos. So, there were some fundamentals that I did. I learned to play piano. But when I had a rhythm section that was very advanced, players that really sat and worked on harmony for 10 hours a day, and they would get under me and they would play and they would be doing things I wasn't playing at the piano, you know? So I had this foundation and I would just go out and I would I have some very early recordings of me taking skat solos early on, and I always would walk off the bandstand thinking, "Oh God, that was terrible," And I would listen back years later, and I would think, "Well, it wasn't terrible, really." I mean, I was able to get in and out unscathed. I don't know that I took the ideas that Ella Fitzgerald was singing when I was embarking on these solos on my own, but they weren't terrible because I
So
had an ear that was developed at an early age.
it sounds as though, first of all, some of this language is totally foreign to me. I'm
I'm
not gonna
sorry.
lie.
Yeah.
That's okay. But it sounds as though once you got hooked, you dove in and went with it and wanted to learn everything you could to become a better singer. What
Very
what
well put.
what was that drive like? What was that? Is it forget about school? Is it forget about this?
Mm,
I'm just going to focus on this. It's almost like you had a pivot in your life, and the
yeah,
pivot now goes to I'm going to be singer-songwriter. Is that a
yeah.
true statement?
Yeah, and that really kind of starts to open the door to a deeper conversation. I don't know how deep you want to go, but you mentioned that I was an author. I had a pivot point in my late adolescence, in my early 20s, where I really kind of broke. I ended up being diagnosed with bipolar disorder,
Ooh.
and I had it really rough for a very long time. And when I kind of recovered from my first couple of episodes, I had a drive to make up for lost time. I had already begun to sing jazz music and studying with a jazz vocal professor. She wasn't a professor, she was a private teacher
Mhm.
outside of the college. I had already begun. And then I kind of broke. There were some difficulties, failed all my classes. Um, I was like awake for 3 or 4 nights in a row, literally without a wink of sleep. I had a very difficult time. I kind of broke. And I put pieces back together, but I became a lot more driven, I think, as a result of having fallen so hard.
Mhm.
I wanted to make up for lost time. I never wanted it to happen again. And the more I experienced some difficulties, some mental difficulties, some emotional difficulties, something in me sparked at the same time it broke. I don't know how to explain it any more plainly than that.
Mhm.
I became so driven. My family just wanted me to be healthy, focus on my health, go back to school, get a job. And I was like, no, I'm going to do this. I had a desire, a burning desire. I had to sing. I think I needed to express a lot of the pain that I was feeling. I think that was really kind of a cornerstone. I used to enjoy singing. I used to want to sing. I used to like to sing. I was in school show choir and school musicals and soloed ensemble contests when I was just this happy-go-lucky teenager. When I went away to college at the end of my freshman year, the end of my sophomore year, I think, things got a lot darker. And that became an oasis, a release. I have to do this. It was like oxygen when I was suffocating. That's about the best way that I can put it. And I became so goal oriented and so goal driven. I mean, I had an intrinsic desire to make music just for the sake of making music, but there was more going on with me. And it's lasted over 30 years. I've had my pitfalls, I've had my ups and downs. I am in remission today, and I live a very stable life, very stable life. My relationships, my work, my music, my faith life, all of it has just grown and become so solid because I live a life in remission today. But I had a lot of falls. I had a lot of breaks. I really had countless setbacks, and everyone left me with a desire to overcome. And this was just a big part of it. And I was releasing and expressing something that was very painful. I think you can kind of hear a lot of that if you go back through my catalog, 9 albums and 15 singles. I think you can kind of hear that there was a struggle going on in me and some unrequited struggles, love, going through that. So I don't know. I think had I not been diagnosed, if I had not been diagnosed with manic and depressive illness in my late adolescence, I don't know that my music would have evolved to the point that it has today.
I first of all want to say thank you for your total honesty. I greatly appreciate
Mm,
that. And I think people need to be more aware of their own general term, mental health. And as long as
yeah,
you can turn it around and make it, let's say, a plus as
yeah,
opposed to a minus, it is
Hmm.
it is it's what we need to do. I tell you
Yep.
what we're going to do right now is we're going to venture into your songbook, your catalog, and we're going to get to a song. I just have a problem saying this title because it just my mind just goes places it shouldn't go. Ladies,
Oh, I don't know
la-
why.
ladies and gentlemen, let's take a listen to Maria Jacobs, and you'd be so nice to come home to.
You'd be all that I could desire under stars chilled by the winter, under an August moon burning above. You'd be so nice, you'd be paradise to come.
Maria, I think your voice is tremendous. I just do. And there's some other
Mm,
things that
thank
you've
you.
done vocally that we'll talk about. But the one thing I want to talk about is in your catalog, are there songs that reflect that time you were in a struggle with your life? And how do you write songs when you're in a, for lack of a better term, in a depressed state?
Yeah, that's a great comment. I wasn't capable of writing when I was really in a manic state more than anything. I think I wrote through depression a little bit, but mostly I think what happens is you kind of tap into those dark times when you've gone through the tunnel. I think most of what I wrote really came as a result of having lived through something very difficult, whether it was a breakup or whether it was, my life kind of fell apart. I'm alone and lonely, whatever. Those kinds of things were a lot easier to write about after I got over the mountain, when I got around what was difficult at the time. That's a great question because it is very difficult to write when you're in a mood state. Excuse me. When you're in a mood state and you're not able to concentrate and your life is just falling apart. I wasn't making great music in those moments, but they became a wonderful catalyst to tap into for me to write.
Mhm.
Instead, I ended up writing. That kind of answer. Does that answer your question a
Yeah,
little bit?
it does. And now I want to jump ahead, and I'm not sure when this happened, and this will
Mhm.
coincide with the two of us meeting. I'm at a radio station working. You're doing traffic
Right.
at a local radio station here in Cleveland, Ohio. How do we get to doing traffic? And then the next move, you go from being a traffic reporter and doing some singing, and you're on the cover of a magazine. Um, and then you go to LA.
Yeah.
You go up, talk about the traffic. What did you learn from being the traffic reporter, and how does that coexist with,
Yeah.
you know, doing what you do?
This kind of piggybacks on what you just asked me. How do you write when you're in a mood state or when you're really depressed? I went to work as a traffic reporter during some of the worst difficulties of my life. Um, was very episodic, dealing with just my mental health wasn't in a good
Mm-hmm.
place, and medications were changing. Um, let me think for a moment. I learned how to improvise on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
I learned how to get up well before the crack of dawn and get to work, although I was usually dashing in the door at the last minute.
Mm-hmm.
I went to work. I became one of those artists. I don't know how many, the laundry list of artists who you hear talk about how they did the job, but they were in pieces behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
They could not manage their everyday life, but they were able to go to work and be on a sitcom or be on a radio show or do a concert, or, a comedian who's out there making people laugh while she's on stage. And when she gets off the mic, she's breaking down in tears because her life
Mm-hmm.
is in such a shambles because of her mental health issues, or he or whoever. That was me when I worked at the traffic center. My sister took me to work a couple of times because medications were changing and I was very drowsy, and she didn't want me driving alone, especially that early in the morning when I was tired and oversleeping.
Mm-hmm.
She went to work with me, and she will testify what a mess I was before I turned the microphone on. And then I turned the microphone on and I did my job. No one listening would have ever guessed that there was anything wrong with me. And then I was a basket case on the way home.
Now,
I actually went into my boss's office once in tears, telling him why I couldn't work anymore. And he was confused and baffled because he couldn't see it.
Right.
So he let me go, and he let me return. That was the bigger gift, is he let me return when I got a little more stabilized.
So at what point do you leave here and go to LA?
Okay, so I had a cousin in the record business, and you might remember him if you followed the music scene way back when. He was the guy who promoted the Dazz Band all the way to the Grammys. My cousin's name was Joe Simone. He
Yes.
backed, and you remember, yeah.
Yes.
He backed and managed the Boku. They were a very successful band, but
Right.
the Dazz Band got a Grammy. Their
Right.
record got heard
Let
out
It
of
Whip.
town
Yep.
because of Joe. Let It
Mhm.
Whip. That's right. That's right. So he was so lovely to me. His death shocked and traumatized me and the rest of the family. He was literally here today, gone tomorrow. He was on his way to play tennis. He came downstairs and said, I don't feel so good. And he dropped dead of a massive heart attack. That was it. I mean, I used to go to Joe's office unannounced. He would drop everything and sit and talk with me about the music business and where I wanted to go. And he was solid that my career was going to take off through him, but he really was old school. It
Mhm.
was an unforgiving business. It was a
Mhm.
fickle business. It was a brutal business, and he didn't want me in it unless I was really ready for it in a lot of ways. Musically, wanted me to have a solid voice, get lots of experience. Anyway, he wasn't going to wave a wand. He was working for Mike Curb out in LA. I mean, theoretically, he could have said, come to LA with me. I'm going to introduce you to Mike Curb. Boom, that's it. He had a plan that was much more old school. And I'm grateful to him for that. I kind of made my bones the hard way.
Mhm.
And I think my music has evolved to a place as a result of not making it as a very, very young person. Not that there's anything wrong with making it as a very young person, but we're products of our environment. So he was actually against going to LA. I had family in Los Angeles, and it was my dream to go out there and sing. He was very discouraging about that. He said, you'll be another number. He goes, it's much better to be here because you've got me. I'm out there.
Right.
Well, when he passed away, that was not the case anymore. So while I was working in radio, actually, let me backtrack a little bit. Bobby Jackson was my dear friend in radio. I was the
WCPN.
right. And I did traffic for CPN. I became great friends. He was like a brother to me, and he made me his research assistant on some jazz programs. So I started disc jockeying there, and he took me to some of the concerts that he was covering, and one of them was Wayne Shorter at the Tri-C Jazz Fest. So Alphonso Johnson was playing for Wayne Shorter,
Mhm.
and he took me backstage, and we had these lovely conversations with these two jazz icons, and they were, talking to me like they'd known me my whole life. There was not an air of arrogance or ego on either of them. So Bobby's introducing me, and he introduced me as a jazz vocalist, as a hardworking, aspiring jazz vocalist. And Alfonso turns to me and he says, really? Have you recorded anything? And I said, I'm working on my first album right now. He goes, well, can I hear it? And I said, well, it's not done, but I have a demo. And of course, I didn't have anything on me. Never
Right.
expected to meet
Right.
Wayne Shorter, right? And then
Right.
give me your demo tape. So I mailed it to Alfonso Johnson, who turned around and wrote me a lengthy letter, right? I don't think there
Mhm.
was email back then. What was
No.
this, 89?
No.
No, this was like 95, 94, something like that. So he writes me this beautiful letter telling me how my first record was one original title track, and the rest were 8 jazz standards that I loved. And he said, the music you're working with in the Great American Songbook will help you in every genre you ever record in. And he was right. He says, I encourage you to come to LA. I think you will do very well out here. So I spent 3 years going out and visiting family and looking for work and meeting Alfonso for lunch, trying to get to LA. Finally moved out there in 1997. I actually had a headhunter get me a sales job. I left radio. Boy, there's so much to unpack here. Never mind why I left radio. I left radio, got a sales job, saved money, made a record, and moved out to LA. That's the short driver's license version. So, so when I moved out there, he said, you should really study with my friend Kevin Littau. And Kevin is a Brazilian jazz vocalist, Brazilian pop and jazz vocalist. And one of my visits, I went out and he was playing for her. And so was Russell Ferrante, and Scotty Mayo was on keyboard. Her then husband, Michael Shapiro, was on drums, who's deceased now. So I met her and I told her, when I'm disc jockeying at 107 Through the Wave, I play a lot of your stuff. And Alfonso wanted me to meet you, and I'd like to study with you. So when I finally moved out there, I began studying with Kevin Littau. So that was actually the long rendition of why I moved to LA. I
Okay.
met Alfonso Johnson. I had family out there. He introduced me to my voice teacher I studied with for over 3 years. And things were really lining up beautifully for me when I first moved out to LA. And that's kind of how it happened.
How long are you in LA?
12 years. They weren't all good years.
Well, we'll skip over that right now.
Yeah.
LA back to Cleveland.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, therein lies another heavy subject. I had some of my lowest moments out in Los Angeles when my mental health was suffering for a lot of reasons. So I came home and I was in treatment for 5 months and I ended up going back. But while I was here, I met someone that I married. We're divorced now. But he was kind of the reason I came back. We dated long distance for a year and he said, I want to come out there. We should be together. And I said, you know what? Things haven't been good for me out here for a very, very long time.
Right.
And I don't know that I can deal with anymore. I mean, I was job to job. I had a great job with great money with the Hertz Corporation. September 11th hit. Corporate travel was in decline. I lost my job. I was like 200% of quota, top performer. Goodbye. That was it. And I struggled from 2001 until I left in 2009. It was a very difficult 8 years. So I followed my then husband back home and we made a life together. And I thought, I will never have a career. I was white knuckling to LA because I thought that was the only place I'd have a career. Well, look how the business has changed. You can be anywhere, release your music nationally. I released some singles that went to national radio airplay. All of those things I would have never accomplished had I stayed in LA. I was getting beat the crap out of in LA in every way. My last 6 years there, I should have left long before I did. I was stubborn and I suffered tremendously for it. So fast forward now, living in Cleveland, it's much more of a happening city today than it was when I left in 1997, right?
Yep.
Things are different.
Before we continue, let's listen to you sing How Great Thou Art. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Maria Jacobs.
Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul.
You've come through an awful lot, and you've come through successfully. And I want people to, and I'm going to get ahead of myself, I want people to hear your music. How many albums?
Me too.
If you can.
Okay.
Nice.
Me too.
How much music have you done? Give me some titles. And I'm going to say this. How can people find your music or follow you or anything like that, other than obviously enrolling in class at Kent State?
Yeah. Well, I have just released in 2023 my 9th album, which is called, it's a live album called Back at the Bop Stop. It's my second live album from the Bop Stop. So I'll tell you, you asked me for the list. Okay, No Frills was my first album, a jazz album I wrote the title track for. My second album was an R&B album I wrote all but one song. That was called Free as a Dove. That was the title track. Then I did Chasing Dreams, which was a jazz record that I did. I actually ended up recording 3 of those songs with Alfonso Johnson and Ndugu Chancellor. He brought Ndugu Chancellor to the table, which was an immeasurable blessing. He was just an absolute perfect human being to me. I didn't know him 100 years, but the time that I did know him, he was perfect. Then I came home. I actually finished that one. Both the second and third album were kind of taking place simultaneously. So I kind of started them in LA, finished them in Cleveland. Then I did an Art of a Duo album with just me and a couple different musicians. It was either me and guitar or me and bass or me and piano, Art of the Duo. Then my 5th album was Here Comes Winter. And that album got finished really due in part to my sudden loss of Bobby Jackson. He was helping me put the pieces together on that album. He suddenly died.
Mm-hmm.
And Here Comes Winter is about winter in your heart. So the song selection and the writing of that title track really was out of immeasurable amount of pain. I was devastated when I lost him. My sixth album was called Lucky Girl, and the title track for which I wrote with Tommy Coster, who is my producer now on a album we're putting together. He's the co-writer and co-producer of The Real Slim Shady. And he got his first gold record with Santana when he was like 16. His dad played for Santana. So we're working on a record right now, but fast forward, that was Lucky Girl. My seventh album was a compilation disc. A good friend and investor said, "You've got a lot of old material you're ignoring. Let's make a compilation album." So we made this double disc. It's called Hold On Your Heart, the only new song on that double disc. So that's a compilation album. My eighth album is Bootlegging at the Bop Stop, which was never supposed to be made.
Right.
Honestly, I dashed out the house late and I grabbed my little flip camera thinking that I would want to grab some footage for social media. And the first set just came out beautiful. So that became Bootlegging at the Bop Stop. And then Back at the Bop Stop. That was professionally recorded by the then director of the Bop Stop, Gabe Pollock. Throughout that whole period of time that I released 9 albums, I also released about 15 singles, several of which are Christmas songs that charted well on the Smooth Jazz holiday charts. They were national promotions. So you can find me everywhere on the internet, really, and on every digital music platform, Spotify, Apple Music. I mean, everywhere they play music streaming wise. And I have a physical distributor too, who puts me in some stores around the country. So you can't miss me, actually.
This, I'm just going to say this because part of this is me being honest with people. I'm going to say I didn't know all this about you, so this information that I'm finding out today is mind blowing to me. There's also something it's all positive.
Okay.
We also have to talk about Joe Samo, but we'll do that once this is over.
Okay.
It is just funny to me how I can talk to different musicians who are from Detroit, Kansas City, New York.
Yeah.
And it becomes full circle. Somehow there used to be the game called 6 Degrees of Kevin Costner.
Right. I remember that. You're dating yourself, Darrell.
Yes. So when I worked at the ball, I worked for the Cleveland Indians for 19 years.
Yeah.
And a camera guy goes, "I think we can play 6 Degrees of Separation using Darrell." And I sat there like, no, you can't. There's just no way. And because of the people that I have met, known, different associations and everything, it's weird.
Yeah.
Because tell me if I'm wrong, but you sang the national anthem at a Cavaliers game?
Oh,
Indians game?
I've done the Indians, the Cavaliers, Thistledown Racetrack, the Browns, and then I went to Chicago and did it for the White Sox.
Okay,
that was a heyday. That was when I was working in traffic reporting, and WMMS was, still in full swing.
Right.
They used to play me singing live the national anthem, and then they would promote my gigs. I mean, I was tiny bit of a local celebrity. You know what I mean? I was getting major publicity people would pay for because I was a traffic reporter, and they were really good to me and they supported me. So they talked about my gigs. They played my national anthem. I mean, they would have me sing little ditties live on the air after my traffic report. I mean, it was an exquisite, very happy time in my life for the most part.
You've albums, singles, author, teacher.
Yeah.
You sing on jingles.
Yeah. I'm also a national voiceover artist.
And a voiceover artist.
Just to throw that in there on you.
What's left for you to do? Well, or what else do you want to do?
Yeah, so I'm currently I'm making this album with Tommy Coster, which will be a little bit of a jazz urban kind of neo soul kind of album that I've written for him, and we're gonna get together on producing that. But what is truly in my heart right now, my faith life has kind of gone through hell and back because of the fighting that I did with my, mental health, getting that on track. I'm in the process. Again, I have this beautiful friend who's a musician and my investor, and he is contributing towards the making of my Christian album, which is going to be kind of a jazz Christian album.
Mm-hmm.
And So I'm doing some work with that, and my dream is that the book finds a publisher, and I release the album with the book, and I kind of go out and do some speaking engagements, and I kind of share my Christian testimony, and what God has done in my life is something that should be shouted. So I'm a devout Christian, I'm a devout Catholic, and my Christian testimony, I kind of feel is powerful, and I want to share it. I mean, I want to share that, and I want to go out and do some speaking engagements, and I really want to close in also on a Christian jazz scene I have yet to really discover. I mean, you have Take Six,
Right.
the Clark sisters, which
Right.
you know they're gospel, they're amazing, but I kind of want to join that area, which is a little bit barren. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, Take Six kind of corners the market on jazz, gospel, Christian
Right.
music, right?
Right. Yeah.
I would love to find a place out there for what I do. That's what's next.
Gives me some thoughts. Maria, this has been an
Yeah.
absolute pleasure. I have enjoyed this tremendously.
Thank you.
Whatever this podcast can do, whatever I can do,
Yeah.
count on me. Just ask, don't be afraid.
Oh boy.
And
God
we'll
bless
see
you. Thank you.
and we'll see what we can do. Ladies and
Okay.
gentlemen, she is Maria Jacobs, and you've heard a great
Thank you.
story. And if you can follow her, follow her. If you can buy and listen to her music, do that. But in the
Oh,
meantime,
I will tell you, and not to interrupt, but you
that's
can
okay.
really you can follow everything about Maria Jacobs at mariajacobs.com. The
Okay.
book, the educating, the music, all of it.
Okay. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Darrell Scott. You have been listening to the Jazz Flyte Podcast. We will talk to you next week. Thank you for tuning in to the Jazz Flyte Podcast. I hope you enjoy the stories and soulful melodies that grew through the doors of time. If you want to stay connected with the latest updates and episodes, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell. Until next time, I'm Darrell Scott.